So I'd like to welcome Philip from Turn to X, Lorene from Hertha, Irina from ArcelorMittal, and Rajesh from Khosla. And we've got our folks up here. Great, welcome, welcome. Okay, so in this panel, we're going to be looking at a physical level, we're going to be talking about green steel. We're going to be talking about new materials, new ways of producing materials with fundamentally less impact on the climate. But we're going to be using that example, that physical technology, as an example of a wider challenge that climate scale-ups face, which is how, as a startup company, do you innovate with incumbent players? So with the ArcelorMittals of the world who are in the steel business, massive scale, global, millions of tons, and you are a early stage company with demonstration projects, production units. How do you make those two work? How do David and Goliath work together? That's kind of the theme that we're going to explore. So each of our panelists has a special vantage point on that. Philip and Lorene as entrepreneurs, Irina from the corporate perspective, and Rajesh as an investor in these companies, who is only going to invest if there's a customer market, which often includes those incumbents. So how do we build those ecosystems that include entrepreneurs and companies? So what I'm going to do is invite each of our panelists to share a bit about their own work and how and the insights that they might have about that collaboration from their experience. So I'll start with you, Philip.
Thank you. So we're a company producing electric natural gas to displace fossil natural gas. As you know, fossil natural gas creates a lot of geopolitical tensions. It creates a lot of emissions. Roughly 15% of the global emissions are coming from combustion of fossil natural gas. And we developed technology to produce natural gas from kind of renewable sources. We built the world's first plant demonstrating it's possible back in Germany in 2018. And we now have commercial operations in Spain delivering to customers. And I think one point I want to highlight, basically what is important, I think if you're working with incumbents, is make it as seamless as possible to integrate your solution. I mean, our solution is a drop-in ready solution. So like other e-fuels, you don't need to change your furnace, you don't need to change your pipelines. You can just use your existing investments which you made, and you may invested billions of dollars in furnaces or in hardware, so you can just reuse that with our technology, with our electric natural gas. So I think this really topic of making it as easy as possible for customers to switch.
Beautiful. And the incumbents that you're working with, sorry, I do have additional mics. Let me grab these for you. You guys can share these. So the incumbents that you're working with are gas distributors, energy companies, as well as industrial companies in, for example, the steel industry who might use that fuel.
Yeah, and I mean shipping also, like 80% of the new ships being ordered right now are powered by LNG. Right now a lot with fossil LNG coming from fracking or coming from Qatar or Russia. And again, this is something where we can, with our drop-in ready fuel, we can help them to decarbonize. Yes. And just to make the link to the space, also the newer rockets are also powered with the majority of energy is coming from LNG as well, because it has such a high energy density. So maybe the future rockets who will bring up more satellites can be also powered by our fuel.
Excellent, excellent, great. Let me go to Lorene.
Good morning, everyone. Lorene Maraway, MIT PhD in mechanical engineering and the founder and CEO of Hertha Metals. So who knows what the most recycled material is on Earth? Steel. Steel, and yet we still have to make 70% of the world's steel from iron ore. That's how great the demand for steel is, because steel is everywhere around us. It is the backbone to modern industry, a material we'll never replace. So with it being responsible for almost 10% of global emissions, Hertha Metals is tackling one of the hardest challenges of our time, and that is decarbonizing steel production in a cost-effective and scalable manner. And that's what we're doing. For the first time, super excited to publicly state that we have achieved 1 ton per day of continuous steel production without CO2 emissions. Thank you. Yeah. And that was done in less than 2 years. So going to space, we call ourselves the rocket ship of the steel industry. A little nerdy. So how we work with incumbents is, well, first of all, I believe that as a startup, you really need to have a strong value proposition and strength in your own company before you approach incumbents, which is why we have been stealthy up until now. you have to provide something of value to the incumbents for them to also work with you. And so after achieving this 1 ton per day pilot plant in which, de-risk the science completely, it's now time to form partnerships with the likes of, for example, Irina with ArcelorMittal. So good segue to hand it off to you, Irina.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone, and it's such a pleasure and honor to be here. And Irina, I'm with ArcelorMittal. I run a corporate venture capital fund of ArcelorMittal called X-Carb Innovation Fund. And you said, normally I start by giving credentials to steel. I'm fascinated by steel. It's one of the greatest materials. It's just so versatile. And like Lorraine said, it's infinitely recyclable. You need steel for pretty much everything when it comes to energy transition. Because quite often I'm being asked, are you looking at alternative materials to replace steel? But like you said, there is just so much steel there, and you need it for electrical vehicles, solar panels, wind towers, and low carbon infrastructure, just name it, data centers. But it's how we produce steel. This is the challenge, which I see as an opportunity for us to make an impact. Just taking a step back, most of the steel currently produced through the blast furnace pathway, and that results in a significant CO2 emissions because you take iron ore and you use coke and coal to convert iron ore to iron. And that's the reason that you have quite a significant, just below 10% of global CO2 emissions come from steel making. We as a group, we are one of the largest steel companies. We are committed to get to net zero by 2050, which is an immense challenge, both from technological but also financial and commercial perspective. We are looking at a number of pathways to get there. One is, and of course we can debate around this, is DRI. It's innovative DRI. DRI stands for direct reduced iron. The challenge there is the infrastructure of hydrogen and the necessary infrastructure to really scale those facilities. The second pathway is what we call smart carbon. There are more than 1,500 steel facilities globally, and you can't just overnight build something new and we can't stand still. So it's using existing facilities but leveraging biocoal, biomass, CCUS to really minimize the carbon footprints from the operations. The third one, and of course, we'll add now the fourth one once we talk, but the third one is direct electrolysis of iron ore. And we, as a group, we are developing direct electrolysis process at a low temperature. Also through the fund, I invested in a company called Boston Metal, which is molten oxide electrolysis of iron ore at high temperature of 1600 degrees. In addition to all of those pathways, we've launched our fund to really support some of the most promising startups. And it's really, regardless of technology, we need so much energy. More than 50% of the cost of steel is really energy related. So regardless of whatever technology we bet on, we need to ensure that we decarbonize the energy value chain. And we need energy around the clock. So while we made some investments in the renewable energy, we can't just operate when the sun shines and the wind blows. It's really, we need base load, we need 24/7 energy. And that's the reason we also invested in the energy storage. There is a promising company, the technology is based on iron ore. Sorry, am I just like...
This is great. This is great. What the question I want to ask you
I just
is,
realized that I can talk endlessly.
No, it's beautiful. We'd be all fascinated to hear about your portfolio. I guess my question is, in your role, thinking about the role in the startup ecosystem, you're both a innovator yourself and a customer for innovators and an investor through your CVC in innovators. How do those roles support each other, and how do they conflict with each other?
This is an excellent question. I think this is really exactly where we stand out, because we have fantastic platform from the production perspective. So whichever technologies, we can always try and test them. And we have a significant geographical footprint. We have customers in more than 150 countries. We have operations in more than 15 countries. And we are pretty much on every continent. So it provides us an opportunity to really use this playground to try and test various technologies to establish their technological viability and, more importantly, their industrial scalability. In addition to that, we have R&D team of more than 1,500 people. So this is such a fantastic opportunity for us to really engage and work with our brilliant scientists and also really try to use some of those technologies. So to answer your question, with every investment we made, we also signed a strategic agreement of some collaboration or MOU or joint development, depending on the technology, because it's not just about financial investment and hoping it's going to have a great financial upside. Well, we hope for that too, but it's really around, can we work with the startup? Can we deploy this technology in our operations? Can we jointly develop the infrastructure if it's a clean energy infrastructure company? So it's really around how do we work together? And then, we actively involved in the development of the technology and getting it to the industrial scale.
Great, thank you.
Something to point out specific about the steel industry is that it is so capital intensive, right? Steel is produced on the scale of 2 million tons to 3 million ton per year plants. And so for a new technology to really proliferate in any meaningful time frame, it's important that companies work together on the asset-wise, and important for your technology to be able to integrate into brownfield mills, right? Rather having to rebuild assets, which is what we do at Hertha Metals as well.
This goes back to the drop-in substitute. idea
Exactly.
that-
Exactly.
Just like Philip.
Just also to add on this, on integration, quite often, there are interesting startups that come to me and, we discuss technology and it looks fantastic at the lab scale. And then I go to our team and, we try to kind of think how it's going to work, and then it's like red flags across the whole integration possibilities.
Yeah.
And then, it sounds great, fantastic in the lab.
It looks like a ski slope at that point.
Yes,
Yeah.
and then, how do you integrate? And I appreciate that, we'll, like also just to put it in perspective, there is close to 2 billion ton of steel produced globally, and this number is set to grow to anywhere between 2.3 to 2.5 billion ton of steel by 2050, depending on which estimates.
The scale is dizzying.
So obviously there is going to be, green field to satisfy this demand. The recycling proportion of steel will increase. So currently, like you said, 30% of steel produced using scrap, and you can recycle, but still there is like 70% you need to produce through the virgin iron.
I want to get Rajesh's voice in here. So when you're investing in companies as an independent VC, what are you looking for in terms of their relationships with incumbents, and how do you think about dovetailing with CVCs like hers?
Sure. I'll add a little bit more color beyond steel itself, just
great.
relate to it. So we are, Khosla Ventures is an $18 billion assets under management. We've been investing in climate tech for the last 20 years now. So we are the earliest investors in companies like LanzaJet, which is the poster child for sustainable aviation fuel, QuantumScape on the solid-state battery side of things, a lot of Commonwealth Fusion, which is here in the Congress. So we only work on hard-to-decarbonize sectors, and steel is an excellent example. I've been with Khosla Ventures 6 years, but I also have worn the CVC hat for 10 years. I was heading Applied Ventures, the venture capital arm of Applied Materials. That was a $150 billion market cap company, kind of providing equipment for semiconductors, solar displays, batteries, and so on. So I've seen the David Goliath game for a while. It doesn't make me any smarter, but I've seen more failures in terms of trying to make that match, and lots of successes in terms of how to get it right, because there is inherent biases in corporations and incumbents. As a startup, you need to know, I look at it as there is a phase when you have to engage initially with the incumbents to try to understand how does your technology going to disrupt that market. I call it as design your product to suit existing infrastructure or the incumbents. Then there is a phase in which you should completely get out of the CVC engagement, because you're wasting their time. You haven't de-risked the technology, you haven't shown the basic performance, you haven't convinced yourself that this technology actually works. Get out of that phase after you have de-risked the technology, so you're not in an analysis paralysis mode with a lot of the CVCs. Because time is the money that you have as a startup, and if you're spending 6, 9, 12 months with the CTO office there and the VP of engineering there, all of that stuff, just trying to answer all the questions, you run out of money before you answer the questions even over email. Forget about actually doing experiments. But there is a phase when you have de-risked the technology, when you really should be working with some of the incumbents. And the interesting thing we have learned is the incumbents don't have to be the incumbents in your existing industry. In this case, I think this is a good example, but there are a lot of industries. I'll give you an example. In nuclear fusion, when we started the Commonwealth Fusion, which is like 2016, by the way, that was the same year when we were the largest investor in OpenAI 6 years ago. So that's the kind of investments we do, kind of much more forward-looking. When we did that investment, we actually looked at it as, how do you look at nuclear fusion existing into retrofitting existing coal boiler plants. That's how disruptive you should be thinking about. Because if you look at a coal boiler plant, everything, the rest of the balance of system in a coal boiler plant, you could just use it for a nuclear fusion plant. The plasma system and the heat extraction is the only thing you should be worried in the nuclear fusion. This is how we think about for every industry. We have a cement company that's actually retrofitting any existing cement plant, which means your barrier to entry is much lower for you as a startup because you can use all the existing capex. That's true for, I mean, Lauren is a good example. She focused on actually de-risking getting to 1 ton per day before starting engagement with incumbents, because then you're creating a win-win scenario. You can move really fast with a lot of the steel companies who are really not going through an analysis paralysis of does it work or not. She's inviting people to just see, look at this is 1 ton per day, and my upcoming, there is no CO2 emissions from here. So there are many ways to skin the cat, and I have tons of examples on that one.
Great, thanks. You had another comment, Philip?
I just want to add, I mean, we talked about, I mean, you asked about how to work with incumbents, and I think we talked about integration, how to make it easy. I think one point I would like to add is about the cost, because I think when we met for the first time in Brussels, I think roughly a year ago, Irina, you mentioned the first mover disadvantage, and this really stuck with me. I think the challenge a lot of companies have when working with incumbents is the costs are very high, so why should the customer enter today versus just wait it out and enter a customer agreement in 5 or 7 or 10 years? But without the customer agreement, the costs are not going down. So I think that's also an important part. And I mean, how we are thinking about it is to offer customers some sort of right of first refusal, for example. So if they come in today, basically, and they commit to a certain price, which is higher, they get a right to also offtake more of our product in the future volumes. So that's
and I'll just say, this is a great preview of a panel that we're going to have later in the day, talking about using carbon markets to create cash flows for some of those price premiums. Which I think will connect the dots back here, but that's a critical piece. So my key takeaways here are engage with the incumbents to really understand their infrastructure and understand what it takes to build something that is genuinely seamless and drop in. Then go away and figure out how to build that thing. Be in stealth mode potentially while you do that, and then come back and re-engage and say, I've got this drop-in opportunity here. Let's work together. That seems to be like kind of the narrative arc that I'm hearing from.
Because the second question a lot of startups have is, if am I teaching the incumbent on all the technologies that I have? Are they going to steal the idea? Is there going to be a CTO office that's going to start working on this technology? And believe it or not, that does happen, no matter how many times incumbents say they have a firewall and all this. These things happen. But the reason incumbents most of the time are not successful is because they're good at scale up. Most of the incumbents are really not good at innovating and really building a completely new technology, which is why SpaceX never came from a NASA or a Lockheed Martin. Tesla didn't come from a GM or a Honda. Like, there are tons of examples. We looked at the last 34 years. Every disruptive innovation has come from startups. Take Uber. Hilton and anybody else could have figured out. Nobody thought of it. Uber didn't come from a car company. Square or Stripe, the fintech innovation that we invested in, didn't come from a MasterCard. So think of it as why startups are the only ways to disrupt innovation, and then figure out how the right incumbent can help you scale up. Don't mix the two, because then you are screwing it up.
Okay.
I'm always becoming defensive when.
Yeah. I was going to say, do you want to have a counter to that, Irina? Yeah.
Every time I'm at the round table and people are saying, exactly this point, I'm always kind of going back to my team. I'm like, we have to find a way.
Bring that microphone
Like we
a
have
little
to be.
closer.
Sorry, can you hear me? Yeah. So I always, I've been at this discussion number of times, and I always try to kind of challenge our team, like how can we also be disruptive? How can we be thinking out of the box? But I fully appreciate, and there are a couple of examples. For instance, you mentioned the investment in LanzaTech, and to combine the 2 points on working with the startups earlier, but also the capital intensity. So LanzaTech technology is a biofermentation technology of recycled gas from the steelmaking facilities. And we have engaged with the startup many years ago, and we built the first pilot plant that took us 5 years and more than 200 million, just to give you the perspective of the scale and time it takes. And this is just the first pilot plant, and we built it in Belgium. And what we do, we take wood waste, and then through torrefaction, we produce biocoal, which we then feed into the blast furnace, replacing PCI, pulverized coal injection. And then we capture the off gases from the blast furnace, and using LanzaTech's biofermentation technology, we produce bioethanol. And I'm a big fan of circularity. And process like that, you start with waste, you produce something which is going to be transportation fuel, and along the way you reduce your carbon emissions. So I'm always looking at this circularity, waste gas, waste heat, waste slack, and we reuse it and really make sure that it's sustainable. But the points I was trying to make is we've been working with LanzaTech, we are the investor, we built the plant, but it's still like very small scale in comparison to what's required.
Yeah, we really need both forms of innovation. Both
LanzaTech is
capabilities.
actually a very good example for both our points. It actually drives the message. We invested in LanzaJet 18 years ago, and it took a lot to de-risk the technology, a lot of sudden deaths, and then they started working with figuring out how do they integrate with steel plants. They thought about what they should do in China, then pull back. Whole bunch of learnings before they de-risk the technology, and obviously you guys have been a very good partner. So that's the right way to think about it.
This timeline issue, though, is what we all need to really focus on. 2050 is right around the corner. It typically takes 20 years to develop a new steelmaking technology. And now think about the billions of tons we make annually. If you take 20 years, you miss the boat. And so what we do at Hertha Metals, and what I'm always telling other founders
I'm super
to
excited,
do,
by the way.
thank you, is parallel approach your development, right? Do detailed engineering risk analysis up front so you can figure out what steps can you leap, because we cannot wait 15 years to get to that scale. Hertha Metals got from 0 to 1 ton per day in 2 years, whereas other startups have taken more than 8 years to get there. And there's no offense to those startups, it's just we cannot wait. So for everyone, we have to really have that urgency, sense of urgency and fire under us. We are in a window of time right now where this adoption is the world is ready, so
Really
take
critical.
advantage.
Okay, thank you so much to our panelists. What we're going to do is, so the next room over is our networking space. Each of the scale-up companies has a table with a little name card and QR code, which they will go and staff that table so that if you have interests and conversations with the folks here, this is your chance to kind of go and join them in the networking space. Others welcome to stay, but I want to just make it okay for everybody to sort of, actually, let's just do this. Let's have everybody stand up. It's good to stretch and use our bodies a little bit. We can do a little dance. And so if folks want